Devin Okafor spent 16 months inside a federal correctional facility for a crime he did not commit. And every single day, his wife Renee visited his house with the man who helped her put him there. He had been a senior project manager with a paid-off truck, a spotless financial record, and a marriage he believed in completely. Then federal investigators laid $214,000 in fraudulent wire transfers on a conference table and showed him his own signature on documents he had never touched, attached to a bank account he had never opened. His attorney told him the evidence was too perfectly constructed to dismantle before the deadline. So Devin did the hardest thing he had ever done. He took the plea, reported to federal custody, and let the world believe it. What Renee did not know, what Derek did not know, what none of them ever considered, was that the man they framed was also the most methodical, patient, and precise person any of them had ever underestimated. They took 16 months from him. They had no idea what he was building with the time they gave him. When Devin Okafor walked out of that facility, the evidence was already filed, the attorneys were already moving, and every person who touched his life with intention to destroy it was already standing inside a trap they could not see. This is what happened when he came home. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Devin Okafor's alarm chirped softly at 5:45 a.m., and he silenced it before it could wake Renee. The routine was as familiar as breathing. Slip out of bed, pull on his worn cotton robe, and pad downstairs to start the coffee maker. The house settled around him with comfortable creaks as the morning light began to filter through the kitchen windows. Their home wasn't flashy, but it was solid. 4 bedrooms in a quiet subdivision outside Atlanta, with good schools nearby and neighbors who waved when they collected their mail. Devin had studied the inspection reports for 3 months before making an offer, checking every detail twice. That's how he did everything. Measure twice, cut once, his father used to say. The coffee maker gurgled its last few drops as Devin spread the Henderson project specs across the kitchen table. The morning light caught the grain of the wood. Oak, not veneer. He'd insisted on real wood when they bought the dining set, even though it meant waiting 2 extra paychecks. Things that mattered were worth waiting for. He pulled his spiral notebook from his briefcase, the one where he kept his personal ledger. Renee teased him about not using apps, but Devin trusted paper. Paper didn't crash, didn't need updates, didn't sync to clouds he couldn't see. The notebook's pages were filled with his neat columns of expenses and income, each entry dated and categorized. Control through documentation. Another lesson from his father. Upstairs, he heard Renee's alarm chime. She'd be down soon, scrolling through her phone as she made her protein shake. The thought brought a small smile to his face. 7 years married, and he still loved watching her move through their morning routine, even if lately she seemed distracted. He reviewed the material costs for the Henderson build, double-checking his math against the supplier quotes. The numbers lined up perfectly, as they always did when he handled them. It had taken years to earn this level of autonomy at the firm. When he'd started, fresh out of college with scholarships barely covering his debt, they'd relegated him to basic site supervision. But Devin had studied every contract, learned every regulation, stayed later than anyone else until his competence became impossible to ignore. Renee's footsteps on the stairs pulled his attention from the specs. She appeared in her yoga outfit, phone already in hand. "Morning, baby," she said, heading straight for the blender. "Morning," he replied, watching as she measured protein powder with precise movements. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, eyes on her screen. Michelle posted photos of their new place in Buckhead. "That kitchen is incredible." Devin heard the note in her voice, the one that suggested their own kitchen, with its practical granite and stainless steel appliances, might be found wanting. But he knew better than to engage with that tone. Instead, he asked, "You meeting the girls for yoga?" Then lunch at that new place near Michelle's. The blender whirred to life, drowning out whatever else she might have said about Michelle's house or neighborhood. Devon returned to his specs, making neat notations in the margins. The Henderson project would come in under budget if he could lock in the lumber prices this week. That would make 3 straight projects delivered under budget, the kind of track record that led to better assignments, bigger responsibilities. He gathered his papers as Renee sipped her shake by the window, scrolling through what looked like interior design photos. "Heading in early," he said, leaning to kiss her cheek. She smelled like expensive face cream and coffee. "Have a good day," she replied, her free hand briefly touching his arm. Her attention remained on the phone screen, where a massive chandelier sparkled in someone else's foyer. Devon pulled his truck into the office parking lot 40 minutes later, the morning sun now fully risen. He liked arriving before the rush, enjoying the quiet of an empty office. His phone buzzed as he killed the engine, a voicemail notification from Sandra in HR. He played it while gathering his briefcase. "Devon, could you come see me first thing? Need to discuss something before the day gets going." Must be about the Henderson project's crew assignments, he thought, checking his watch. He had time before the concrete pour needed his supervision. The morning stretched ahead, orderly and planned, like every other morning in the life he'd built piece by careful piece. He headed for the building's entrance, nodding to the security guard. His shoes clicked against the polished floor of the empty lobby as he made his way to the elevator, completely unaware that this ordinary Tuesday was about to shatter everything he thought he knew. The conference room felt different the moment Devon stepped inside. Sandra from HR sat with her hands folded too tightly on the table. His supervisor, Mark Chen, stood by the window, shoulders rigid, looking anywhere but at Devon. And there were 2 others, a man and woman in dark suits, their expressions professionally neutral. "Mr. Okafor," the woman said. "I'm Agent Peterson with the FBI, and this is Agent Torres. Please, have a seat." Devon's mind shifted into the same careful mode he used when reviewing troubled project specs, methodical, detail-oriented, looking for the load-bearing facts. He sat down, placed his notepad on the table, and uncapped his pen with steady hands. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice level. Agent Peterson opened a folder. "We're investigating financial irregularities in your company's vendor payment system, specifically a series of wire transfers that have drawn our attention." She slid several documents across the table. Devon recognized the format immediately. Payment authorizations, the kind he processed regularly for material suppliers and subcontractors. But these numbers didn't match any projects he knew. "Over the past 11 months, Agent Torres said, approximately $214,000 has been transferred through these authorizations to an account at First Capital Bank. The account was opened under your name and social security number at their Savannah branch." Savannah. Devon had been there once, 2 years ago, for a regional construction conference. He'd never opened an account there. He'd never opened an account anywhere except his local branch. "May I?" he asked, reaching for the bank documents. The agents nodded. His eyes moved systematically down the pages. His name, his social security number, his address, everything perfect except for its existence. Then he saw the signature authorizations, digital signatures that matched his own with unsettling precision. "I've never seen these transfers," he said carefully, "and I've never opened an account in Savannah." "The account was opened in person," Agent Peterson replied, "with 2 forms of ID and biometric verification. We have the documentation here." More papers slid across the table. Devon studied them with the same focused attention he gave to structural engineering reports. His signature appeared exactly where it should, perfect in its forgery. The dates aligned with legitimate project payments, tucked between real transactions like weeds among crops. Sandra cleared her throat. "Given the circumstances, we have to place you on immediate administrative suspension, Devon. We'll need your badge and laptop before you leave." He nodded once, removed his badge, and placed it on the table. His work laptop was already in his briefcase, the one containing nothing but legitimate project files and meeting notes. He handed it over without comment. "We'll be in touch through your supervisor regarding next steps," Agent Peterson said. "I suggest you retain legal counsel promptly." Devon stood, straightened his tie, and walked out with the same measured pace he used on construction sites. No rushing, no reaction, just careful steps on solid ground. The drive home passed in controlled silence. He took his regular route, stopped at every light, used his turn signals with precision. His mind worked like a calculator, adding up small details he'd missed. Renee's recent interest in their banking passwords, her questions about his digital signature setup, the conference in Savannah she'd encouraged him to attend. He pulled into their driveway at 9:47 a.m. The house looked exactly as it had when he'd left. Brick facade, neat shrubs, morning paper still on the porch. He sat in the truck, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and watched the dashboard clock tick through 11 minutes. Inside, the house was quiet. Renee would be at yoga, then lunch near Michelle's. Their shared laptop sat on the coffee table where she'd left it, charging cord neatly coiled beside it. Something, instinct or experience or simple survival, told him to look before he spoke. He opened the laptop, logged in, and began searching through folders. Renee organized everything by date, a habit he'd always appreciated. Now he used that knowledge to move backward through their digital history. In a folder marked for deletion, he found them. Emails between Renee and someone named Derek Stowe. The messages were cold and precise, discussing the account and the timeline with business-like efficiency. His eyes caught on one line that turned his stomach to ice. "By the time they connect it to him, we'll have everything we need, and he won't be in a position to fight it." The email was dated 8 months ago. While he'd been reviewing contracts and managing projects, his wife had been managing something entirely different. His hands never shook. His breathing never changed. He stared at the screen with the same careful attention he gave to everything else in his life. The life that was now revealed to be built on sand instead of stone. Devon moved with practiced efficiency, his phone steady as he photographed each email. The messages filled his screen one by one, digital proof of betrayal, captured in silent clicks. He sent them to his encrypted personal account, then methodically erased all traces of his discovery. Browser history cleared. Laptop positioned exactly as he'd found it. Even the charging cord remained in its precise coil. He heard Renee's car in the driveway just as he finished, the familiar sound of her key in the door, her heels on the hardwood. "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting down her yoga mat. "Everything okay?" Devon looked at his wife, really looked at her, the woman who'd planned his destruction over morning coffee, who'd kissed him goodbye while orchestrating his imprisonment. His voice came out steady, almost warm. "Yeah, just a slow day. What do you want for dinner?" The next 72 hours unfolded like a technical manual. Devon retained Patricia Walsh, a criminal defense attorney recommended by a colleague. They met in her downtown office, surrounded by law books and the faint smell of coffee. "The case against you is comprehensive," Patricia said, spreading documents across her desk. "The bank account has your biometric data, fingerprints that match ones from your employment records. Every wire transfer bears your electronic signature. The money moves through the account into a shell LLC that's deliberately difficult to trace." Devon studied the papers with the same focus he gave project specifications. "How long?" "If we go to trial and lose, 5 years minimum. Federal prosecutors don't bring cases they haven't built to win." She leaned forward. "But they're offering a plea deal. 1 count of wire fraud. 18 months in a minimum security facility, restitution payments, supervised release. Time to prove my innocence?" Patricia shook her head. "Not before their deadline. Building a defense against this level of documentation would take months, maybe longer. They've constructed this carefully." Devon did the math in his head. 5 years versus 18 months. Time to fight versus time to plan. He made his decision the way he made all others, measuring cost against benefit, calculating load against structure. I'll take the plea. The night before he reported to the facility, Devon sat in his kitchen with Terrence. His older brother's military bearing showed in his posture, in the precise way he held himself still. Renee was visiting her mother, a phrase that now carried new weight. "Is there anything you want me to watch while you're gone?" Terrence asked, his voice quiet in the empty house. Devon pulled out his phone, pulled up the emails. He handed it over without explanation. Terrence read them once, then again, his expression unchanging. The only tell was a slight tightening around his eyes. "Don't move yet," Devon said. "Just wait. Watch. Document everything." Terrence folded the phone screen down with military precision. "I'll be here when you get back." Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Devon dressed in clothes selected according to facility guidelines. No belt, slip-on shoes, nothing that could be used as a weapon against himself or others. He packed nothing. Everything he needed would be provided inside. Renee cried at the door. Her performance was flawless, the devastated wife seeing her husband off to prison. She touched his face with trembling fingers. "I'll wait for you," she whispered. Devon allowed the touch, allowed her tears to fall on his shirt. He had 18 months to remember every detail of this moment. The federal facility rose from the Georgia landscape like a concrete prophecy. Guard towers, razor wire, chain-link fences that seemed to absorb sunlight. Devon walked through intake processing with the same careful attention he gave everything else. Strip search, prison uniform, fingerprints, photograph. Each step documented, each form signed. The final door closed behind him with a sound like punctuation. He was inside. His wife had put him here. And somewhere in the background, silent as a stopwatch, the clock began its count. Inside, time moved differently. Devon woke at 5:45 a.m. without an alarm, his body's rhythms unchanged by concrete walls and steel bars. He made his bed with military corners, smoothing the thin blanket until it laid perfectly flat. The same attention to detail that had built his career now structured his confinement. By mid-morning, he claimed his usual spot in the legal library. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he methodically worked through volumes on financial law. He'd never studied law before, but the technical language felt familiar, not unlike reading building codes and project specifications. He took careful notes in a spiral notebook, focusing on wire fraud prosecution precedents and forensic accounting principles. "You're hitting those books pretty hard," commented Martinez, one of the library trustees, as he reshelved returns. Devon looked up briefly, just trying to understand the system better. That was all he ever said about it. He didn't discuss his case with other inmates, didn't protest his innocence or seek sympathy. He simply read, absorbed, and documented. In the afternoon, he moved to the weight yard. The repetitive motion of lifting helped process what he learned, turning information into something load-bearing in his mind. Some men lifted to get bigger, to project strength. Devon lifted to maintain control over his body, his thoughts, his growing understanding of exactly what had been done to him. His private journal grew page by page, not with emotions or complaints, but with facts, dates, amounts, account numbers, transaction sequences. He constructed a timeline that started 8 months before his arrest, marking each new piece of information Terrence sent him. The letters arrived weekly, written in the shorthand they'd developed as kids to keep their mother from reading their notes. Sunday mornings, he allowed himself 30 minutes of feeling. In his bunk before breakfast count, he let the full weight of Renee's betrayal press against his chest. The rage rose like bile, not just at the theft of his freedom, but at the calculated nature of it. The way she'd studied his habits, learned his patterns, used his own meticulous nature against him. The grief came in waves, not for the loss of her love, which he now understood had never truly existed, but for the death of his own trust. 30 minutes. Then he packed it away and returned to preparation. Terrence's letters painted an increasingly clear picture. Through his logistics company contacts, he'd traced the Shell LLC's property holdings. The $214,000 stolen through Devon's forged signatures wasn't just about money. It was seed capital for something bigger. Derek Stowe, the man from the emails, had leveraged it into a down payment on a commercial property deal. Renee was his silent partner, her name carefully absent from any official documentation. Properties in an area marked for major development, Terrence wrote in their childhood code. 3-year timeline. Triple value minimum once announced. They needed your profile gone. No legal claims possible. Devon read each letter multiple times, absorbing the layers. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was architectural. They hadn't just wanted him out of the way. They needed him financially ruined, legally compromised, and completely consumed with basic survival while they built their future on the foundation of his destruction. He added each new detail to his timeline: the property purchase dates, the development plan announcements, the careful way they'd structured his removal to coincide with their investment timeline. Every piece fit together with terrible precision. The latest letter from Terrence arrived on a Tuesday. Devon read it in his bunk after dinner count, decoding each line with practiced ease. More details about the property deal, confirmation of Renee's silent partnership, evidence of how they'd used his stolen money to secure additional financing. He set the letter down on his small metal desk, took out a sheet of paper and his prison-issued pen. In the same childhood code, he wrote back a single line: "Get Loretta." He folded the paper with precise corners, sealed it in the envelope, and added it to the outgoing mail stack. Then he returned to his bunk, opened his journal, and continued building his timeline. Each entry another brick in the foundation of what was to come. Terrence sat across from Loretta Vance in her downtown Atlanta office. The space was ruthlessly organized. No family photos, no decorative touches, just filing cabinets and dual monitors displaying financial spreadsheets. She studied Devon's timeline with the same efficiency that defined her workspace. "Everything documented here," Terrence said. "My brother put together from inside. Dates, amounts, connections, all of it." Loretta adjusted her reading glasses, continuing to scan the pages without any change in expression. Her gray hair was cut in a practical bob, and she wore a charcoal blazer that meant business. She hadn't asked about Devon's story, or expressed sympathy when Terrence explained the situation. She'd simply named her hourly rate and asked to see the documentation. After several minutes, she looked up. "Whoever built this was careful, but they weren't an expert. There are 3 places where this leaks." She turned one of her monitors toward Terrence, pulling up public records databases. First leak, the Shell LLC. They registered in Delaware thinking that would be enough to hide ownership. But with the right filing requests and connection mapping, we can trace it. Give me 2 weeks on that thread. Terrence nodded, taking notes in his small notebook. What else? The biometric data they used to open the fraudulent account. Loretta typed rapidly, bringing up licensing board records. That level of forgery requires specialized equipment and certification. Not many notaries handle it. The one they used, I'm already seeing a flag on their license from a similar irregularity last year. That's leak number 2. She turned back to Devon's timeline. And they moved money in predictable patterns. Structured, but not sophisticated enough to hide the targeting. Give me 60 days. I'll have a documentary chain that shows your brother wasn't the perpetrator. He was the designated fall guy. Over the following months, Loretta's invoices arrived with clockwork regularity, each accompanied by detailed findings reports. She worked with mechanical precision, building the case piece by piece. The Shell LLC's ownership structure began to emerge through corporate filings and tax records. Derek Stowe's name appeared buried in subsidiary documentation, connected to the property purchase through a maze of paper entities. The notary investigation yielded even more. The individual who certified the biometric forgery had handled similar work for other questionable financial transactions. Their license had been flagged but not revoked, an oversight that created a documented pattern of irregular practices. Terrence brought each new piece of evidence to their weekly meetings, watching Loretta add it to her growing case file. She never showed excitement at breakthroughs or frustration at dead ends. She simply processed information, followed trails, and documented everything. Month 11, Terrence reported during one meeting. Renee just filed for divorce. Loretta looked up from her computer. Grounds: irreconcilable differences, emotional abandonment. Terrence's jaw tightened slightly. She's not wasting any time moving forward. Document everything, Loretta said, turning back to her screen. Every filing, every date. It all adds to the pattern. Within weeks of serving Devon the papers, Renee made her next move. Phil Garrett, who still worked at Devon's former firm, emailed Terrence a photograph. Derek Stowe's black Range Rover sat in Devon's driveway. No attempt at discretion. Phil's message was brief. Thought you should have this. Terrence forwarded the photo through approved channels to Devon, along with the divorce filing details. Loretta had taught him to document everything methodically, so he noted the exact date and time Derek officially moved into the house. In his bunk at the federal facility, Devon received the manila envelope containing his divorce papers. He read through them carefully, noting Renee's claims of abandonment with clinical detachment. The man who had loved her felt very far away from the one who now held her petition for dissolution. He signed where indicated, added the papers to his outgoing mail, and wrote a short note to Terrence. Good. Now she can't claim she didn't know what was coming. Loretta added the divorce filing to her evidence timeline, another data point in the pattern she was assembling. Your brother's ex-wife is making this almost too easy, she commented to Terrence. She's operating like someone who believes they've already won. Loretta's call came at 6:43 a.m. I need you to come in, she said without preamble. Found something you should see directly. Terrence arrived at her office within the hour. The morning sun hadn't yet reached her window, leaving the space lit only by the harsh glow of her computer monitors. She didn't look up when he entered, focused on pulling files onto her screen. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her typical efficiency had an added edge this morning, something in how she clicked through screens, the slight tension in her shoulders. The notary who executed the biometric forgery, she began, turning one monitor toward him. I've been mapping their client history, following the money trail backward. Found the original payment authorization yesterday evening. She brought up a bank record, highlighted in yellow. The services were arranged by Renee Okafor. That we expected. But look at the source account. Terrence leaned forward, studying the numbers. The payment had come from a joint checking account. Two names were listed, Renee Okafor and Audra Prescott. The account was opened 2 years before your brother's arrest, Loretta continued, her voice maintaining its usual clinical tone. Well before the rest of their scheme began taking shape. Audra Prescott didn't just know about this. She helped finance it from the planning stages. Terrence sat back slowly, processing. Audra Prescott, who had hugged Devon at family gatherings, insisted he call her Mom, made sure his favorite pie was at every Thanksgiving dinner, who had cried at his sentencing hearing, clutching her daughter's hand, who had known, the whole time, exactly what they were doing to him. I've pulled the full account history, Loretta said, clicking through additional records. The notary payment wasn't isolated. There were several transfers that align with key dates in our timeline. Audra Prescott's fingerprints are all over this. Terrence scheduled a visit with Devon for the following day. The prison visiting room was crowded with weekend traffic. Families with children, elderly parents, the usual mix of joy and tension that filled these spaces. He and Devon sat at a corner table, away from the main cluster of visitors. "Loretta found something," Terence said quietly, watching his brother's face. "About Audra." He laid out what Loretta had discovered: the joint account, the notary payment, the pattern of financial involvement stretching back before Devon's arrest. He kept his voice steady, clinical, the way Loretta would have presented it. Just facts, data points. Devon absorbed everything in complete silence. His expression didn't change, but Terence saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hands remained perfectly still on the table. 1 minute passed, then another. Finally, Devon spoke. "Add her to the file." His voice was quiet, controlled, the same tone he'd used throughout their visits, discussing evidence and strategy. But Terence heard what lay beneath it, the final confirmation that no part of his old life had been real, that every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every maternal embrace had been part of the performance. "The complete package is ready," Terence reported. "Loretta's forensic analysis, all the Shell LLC documentation, the notary trail, everything tracked and verified." Devon nodded once. "Hold it all. Nothing moves until I walk out." They spent the remainder of the visit discussing mundane things: Terence's business, weather, sports scores. Neither mentioned Audra again. When visiting hours ended, they stood and exchanged their usual brief hug. Driving home, Terence glanced at the sealed manila envelope on his passenger seat. Inside was the complete evidence file, hundreds of pages documenting every layer of betrayal, every calculated step that had put his brother behind bars. Audra's involvement was now woven through it, another thread in the pattern Loretta had exposed. He didn't open the envelope, didn't need to review its contents again. His job now was simply to wait, to hold everything in place until Devon walked free. The file would stay sealed until then, but its weight beside him felt like a promise of truth, of consequences, of a reckoning that would leave no betrayal unanswered. The traffic light ahead turned red. Terence stopped, hands steady on the wheel. He had waited 16 months already. He could wait a little longer. The metal gate buzzed and slid open on a gray Thursday morning. Devon Okafor walked through it wearing the same clothes he'd arrived in 16 months earlier. Dark jeans, white button-down, leather shoes. They felt strange now, like costume pieces from someone else's life. But his stride was steady, unhurried. He didn't look back at the facility rising behind him. Terence's black F-150 sat in the first row of the visitor parking lot, his brother leaning against the driver's side door. No words passed between them as Devon approached. None were needed. Terence simply opened the passenger door, waited for Devon to get in, then walked around and took his place behind the wheel. The manila envelope sat on the center console, thick, official-looking, secured with a metal clasp. Terence handed it over without ceremony. Devon undid the clasp and began reviewing the top documents, his eyes moving methodically across each page. Loretta's forensic analysis, the Shell LLC documentation, the notary payment records from Audra's joint account, bank statements, timeline reconstructions, sworn affidavits. After several minutes, he closed the folder. "Everything ready?" "Everything," Terence confirmed, starting the engine. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving the prison far behind, eventually turning into a modern apartment complex on the north side of Atlanta. Far from the house Devon had shared with Renee, far from any familiar territory. Terence parked in front of Building C and led the way to Unit 304. The apartment was small but well-furnished. A desk by the window, comfortable couch, fully equipped kitchen. Terence had stocked the fridge and cabinets. Clean sheets on the bed. Everything necessary. Nothing excessive. "I'll be back tomorrow," Terence said, leaving a set of keys on the counter. "Phone's activated. Numbers you need are programmed in." Devon nodded once. Terence left without further discussion. They had planned this part months ago through their coded letters. the immediate transition, the setup, the sequence of next steps. No need to review it now. For the next 7 days, Devon barely left the apartment. He sat at the desk by the window, methodically working through every page of Loretta's complete file. He made notes in his precise handwriting, cross-referencing dates and transactions, building his own supplementary timeline. The work required his full focus. He spoke to no one except Terence, who brought food and necessities without attempting conversation. On day 3, Wesley Odom arrived, a federal criminal defense attorney specializing in wrongful conviction reversal. He was mid-50s, silver-haired, with the careful precision of someone who had dismantled many supposedly solid cases. "Walk me through it," Odom said, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. For 2 hours, Devon laid out the evidence chronologically: the fraudulent account creation, the biometric forgery, the wire transfers, the Shell LLC, Loretta's forensic reconstruction, Audra's financial involvement, each piece documented, verified, and connected to the others. Odom listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook. When Devon finished, the attorney was quiet for several moments. "It's prosecutable," he said finally. "The forensic work is exceptional. The documentation is complete. We can file for reversal immediately and push for a parallel criminal investigation into all parties involved." "Cost?" Devon asked. "Significant. But given the strength of the case, I'm willing to work on partial contingency." "Done," Devon said. They shook hands, signed paperwork, and Odom left with copies of key documents. The next piece came together through Phil Garrett. Devon called him directly, using the number Terence had verified was still active. Phil agreed to meet immediately. They sat in Odom's office the following morning, Phil's own attorney present. Phil's voice was steady, as he detailed what he'd overheard at a firm event 2 years before Devon's arrest. Derek Stowe, slightly drunk, telling another broker that they were making sure Devon takes the hit. The statement had seemed strange at the time, but without context or proof, Phil had been powerless to act. "I should have found a way to warn you," Phil said, looking directly at Devon. "I'm sorry." "You're making it right now," Devon replied. The court reporter finished transcribing Phil's statement. Documents were signed and notarized. By week's end, everything was in motion. Odom filed the motion for wrongful conviction reversal with the federal court. The complete evidence package, Loretta's forensic analysis, the documented fraud trail, Phil's sworn testimony, everything, was delivered to both the federal prosecutor's office and the state attorney general. That night, Devon sat at the apartment desk, reviewing copies of the filed documents one final time. The desk lamp cast a small circle of light in the darkness. He closed the folder carefully, ran his hand once across its surface, then stood and walked to the bedroom. Tomorrow would bring its own requirements. For now, he needed sleep. The private dining room at Marcel's was exactly what Devon had specified. Intimate, but not romantic. Well lit, but not harsh. With a heavy wooden door that closed firmly against the main restaurant's noise. He had arrived 20 minutes early to settle into the space, choosing the chair that faced the entrance. His charcoal suit was precisely tailored, his white shirt crisp, his tie a deep blue that spoke of business rather than emotion. He sat completely still, hands resting lightly on the white tablecloth. The folder lay beside his right hand, its presence as deliberate as everything else in this carefully constructed moment. He had rehearsed none of what he would say. He didn't need to. 16 months of silence had refined every word to its essential truth. The door opened at exactly noon. Renee entered first, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was longer than when he'd last seen her, styled in the loose waves she wore when she wanted to appear effortlessly put together. Derek followed close behind in an expensive gray suit, his confidence visible in the way he claimed the space without hesitation. Devin, Renee said, her voice carrying that practiced note of sympathetic warmth she'd perfected over years of managing difficult conversations. You look well. She took the seat across from him, smoothing her dress as she sat. Derek settled beside her, adjusting his sleeve cuffs with the casual authority of a man who believed the hard part was already over. I appreciate you agreeing to meet, Renee continued, her tone sliding into something slightly condescending. The voice one uses with someone who needs to be guided gently toward acceptance. I think it's important we handle this final piece like adults. The asset division doesn't have to be contentious. Derek nodded, adding his own carefully measured perspective. The market's been good to the property values in the area. The house sale should leave everyone in a comfortable position to move forward. Devin watched them perform this choreographed display of reasonable people having a reasonable conversation. He let the familiar rhythm of Renee's management technique wash over him, the way she layered subtle pressure under apparent kindness, the practiced tilt of her head that suggested empathy while conveying inevitability. The furniture can be divided however you prefer, she offered, her fingers tracing the edge of her water glass. I know some pieces have sentimental value, and of course, there's the matter of your mother's china cabinet. 4 minutes. He had promised himself he would give them exactly 4 minutes to reveal who they still believed they were in this story. Time was up. Without speaking, Devin placed the folder on the table. The sound it made against the white tablecloth was soft but final. He opened it with precise movements, laying out the first document, Loretta's forensic analysis of the Shell LLC. The company was registered in Delaware on March 15th, 2 years ago, he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily in the contained space. The ownership structure was obscured through 3 layers of holding companies, but the beneficial ownership traces directly to you, Derek, and you, Renee, through a silent partnership agreement, dated April 3rd. He laid out the next document. The notary who forged my biometric data for the fraudulent account was paid $18,000 from a joint account registered to Renee and Audra Prescott. The payment cleared on May 7th, exactly 2 months before the first wire transfer. Derek started to speak, his face showing the first crack in its confident facade. Devin turned his gaze to him, not angry, not dramatic, simply absolute in its stillness, and Derek's words died in his throat. Renee's composure began to splinter. Devin, you don't understand. I understand everything, he said, continuing to lay out documents with methodical precision. The timeline you built, the way you structured the transfers, how you used my signature from the Henderson Project document, every meeting with the bank, every email about the timeline, every conversation about making sure Devin takes the hit. I understand not most of it, every piece. Renee's carefully maintained expression crumbled further. We had a life together, she tried, her voice carrying a desperate edge. Whatever you think happened, what I think doesn't matter, Devin said. What's documented does. Wesley Odom filed the motion for wrongful conviction reversal this morning. The federal prosecutor and state attorney general have the complete evidence package. The civil suit for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress was filed an hour ago. He paused, letting the weight of it settle. Audra has already been contacted by investigators. The morning after the confrontation, Devin's phone buzzed at exactly 8:15 a.m. Wesley Odom's name appeared on the screen. Renee's attorney is requesting an emergency call, Odom said, his tone measured and professional. They're suggesting we discuss mitigation options before things escalate further. Devin stood at his apartment window, looking out at the morning traffic. Let them call. The machinery he had set in motion worked with precise, unstoppable force. Within days, the federal prosecutor's office assigned a team to review Loretta's forensic documentation. The evidence package landed exactly as Odom had predicted. Comprehensive, interconnected, and impossible to dismiss. The prosecutor who had originally charged Devon now found herself examining a meticulous record of how that prosecution had been orchestrated. Phil Garrett's sworn statement provided the human framework that brought Loretta's numbers to life. His recorded testimony about Derek's pre-arrest comment, "Making sure Devon takes the hit," transformed financial data into clear intent. The federal investigation opened officially 3 weeks after the confrontation. The civil suit's impact hit even faster. The commercial real estate investment that Derek and Renee had built with stolen money froze immediately under judicial review. The property deal that was supposed to triple their money collapsed instead, taking Derek's carefully constructed professional network with it. His business partners, facing their own reputational risks, dissolved their partnership agreements rather than weather an active federal investigation. Within 60 days, the name Derek Stowe became toxic in Atlanta's real estate circles. Renee's response to the pressure revealed everything about who she had always been. She retained Martin Walsh, an aggressive defense attorney known for scorched earth tactics, and she did it on Derek's credit line without consulting him. When Derek discovered the $50,000 retainer charge, the partnership that had destroyed Devon's life fractured along predictable lines. She acted alone, Derek's attorney claimed in filed statements. "My client was misled about the source and nature of the investment funds." Mr. Stowe was the architect of the entire scheme, Renee's new counsel countered. "My client acted under his direction and influence." Each accusation they hurled generated another piece of evidence for the prosecution. Their mutual destruction became a steady stream of documented admissions. Audra Prescott received her subpoena on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, she had retained Patricia Chen, a criminal defense attorney specializing in financial crimes. Chen reviewed the documentation of Audra's joint account with Renee, the source of the notary payment that enabled the biometric forgery, and advised her client of exactly one thing: cooperate immediately. The Prescott family imploded with stunning speed. Audra's husband of 40 years filed for separation within weeks of learning the full scope of her involvement. Renee's younger sister, a vice president at a regional bank, stopped taking her calls. The carefully maintained image of family unity collapsed under the weight of documented complicity. At Devon's former firm, management moved quickly to distance themselves from the scheme. Phil Garrett received a substantial promotion to senior project manager, the company's way of demonstrating their support for employee integrity. They issued a formal statement emphasizing their own victimization and full cooperation with investigators. 90 days after the confrontation, Devon received the document he had worked 18 months to obtain: formal vacation of his conviction. The single-page letter from the federal court arrived by certified mail. He signed for it, opened it at his kitchen table, and read it once. Then he placed it in a simple black frame, not displayed prominently, just mounted on his home office wall beside his engineering degree. Not a trophy. Documentation. The system that had failed him now moved with methodical purpose to correct itself. 8 months after his release, Renee appeared in federal court in a gray suit that carried none of the confidence of her cream dress from the restaurant. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud conspiracy and 1 count of obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced her to 31 months in federal prison. Derek, maintaining his innocence to the end, took his chances at trial. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding him guilty on 3 counts. His sentence? 42 months in federal custody. Audra's cooperation earned her what her attorney had promised: supervised probation and a substantial fine. The leniency did nothing to repair her shattered family or restore her standing in the community she had spent decades cultivating. Devon wasn't in the courtroom for any of it. He was at a job site when the notification appeared on his phone: breaking, Renee Okafor, sentenced in wire fraud scheme. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. and returned his attention to the blueprints spread across the work table. The truth was now properly documented. That was enough. The sun hadn't yet risen when Devin Okafor settled into his morning routine. 5:45 a.m., exactly as always. Steam rose from his coffee mug as he reviewed infrastructure contract specifications spread across his home office desk. The house around him was quiet. Not the hollow quiet of loss, but the peaceful silence of a space that belonged entirely to him. Natural light began filtering through the eastern windows, gradually illuminating the room. The office walls held only what mattered: his engineering degree, the formal exoneration letter in its simple black frame, and a photograph of the consultancy's team standing in front of their new office building. 4 employees now, with interviews scheduled for a 5th position next week. Okafor and Associates Infrastructure Management had exceeded even Terrence's projections for their first 18 months. They'd started with small municipal contracts, bridge inspections, roadway assessments, the kind of essential work that built credibility without headlines. Word spread through the industry about their attention to detail and absolute reliability. Now they had more projects than they could comfortably handle, and they were growing at exactly the pace Devin wanted. Deliberately, load-bearing wall by load-bearing wall. The civil suit settlement had provided the seed money, but it was their reputation that built the business. The final number had been substantially more than the stolen $213,000, the court factoring in lost wages, emotional damages, and the considerable legal costs of dismantling a sophisticated fraud. Devin had used part of it to purchase this house outright. No mortgage, no shared deed, no question about whose name stood on every document. He glanced at the empty space on his bookshelf where the prison journal used to sit. 1 year after his release, on a clear autumn evening, he'd burned it in the backyard fire pit. The journal contained everything: dates, times, documented facts, the full record of what was done to him. He hadn't opened it once since walking free. When the last page turned to ash, he felt no anger, only completion. The record had served its purpose. Sarah's coffee mug sat in the kitchen sink. She'd left early for her hospital shift. Their relationship had developed slowly over the past 8 months, beginning with a chance conversation at his local coffee shop. She was straightforward, patient, and laughed easily at life's small absurdities. Most importantly, she had no connection to his past life. She knew his story, but it wasn't what defined him to her. In his own home, with her, he no longer led with guardedness. His phone buzzed, a text from Phil Garrett confirming dinner plans for the consultancy's 1-year anniversary celebration. Phil had become more than just a crucial witness. He was now a friend and occasional project collaborator. During their last dinner, Phil had mentioned that Derek's failed commercial real estate venture had finally sold to a small development group that executed the exact strategy Derek had planned. The property's value had indeed tripled, just as projected. The profits went to people who'd earned them honestly. Devin had laughed then, genuinely and without edge. "Good," he'd said, raising his glass. "Let somebody honest have it." Renee existed now only as a fact. A chapter closed, a betrayal answered, history properly documented. He neither followed her status in the federal system nor allowed it mental real estate. The woman who had orchestrated his destruction had become exactly what she deserved to be, irrelevant to his present. The morning light strengthened, warming the room. Devin made notes on the infrastructure proposal in front of him, his handwriting precise and unhurried. A text from Terrence appeared. Martinez contract revised specs came in. Looking solid. Devin smiled slightly. His brother's efficiency remained absolute. The clock read 6:30 a.m. Soon he would shower, dress, and drive to the office in his new truck. Not flashy, just reliable. Like everything else he chose to surround himself with now. But for these quiet morning moments, he simply sat with his coffee, reviewing plans for structures that would stand exactly as designed. He closed the project file and lifted his mug, looking out at the early morning. The same discipline that had defined him remained, but now it served only his own purpose, answering to no one's timeline but his own. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.